The school auditorium was alive with noise, laughter, and chatter as students filled the seats, waiting for the weekly talent showcase to begin. Everyone was excited, some because they were performing and others simply because they loved to watch. The lights hung from the ceiling, bright and warm, casting a golden glow over the polished wooden floor. In the middle of the stage, a grand piano stood, elegant and imposing with its glossy black surface reflecting the overhead lights. For most students, it was just another instrument, but for her it was a world waiting to be discovered. She had always been quiet, often observing more than speaking. Her thoughts were her own companions, and music had been the secret language she spoke to herself. The piano at home was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself and feel alive. Today, however, was different. Today, she would attempt to play in front of others, in a space filled with laughter, skepticism, and eyes that could judge her in an instant. As she walked toward the stage, she could feel the weight of every glance. Some students were already smirking, whispering to each other. A few stood in small groups, folding their arms and looking at her with an air of disbelief. She's actually going to play on stage? Look at her, she's so tiny. Another student laughed, the sound loud enough for her to hear. Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept walking, head slightly lowered, trying to ignore the rising tension in the air. Once she reached the piano, she took a moment to look at it closely. The black and white keys stretched out before her like a row of stepping stones, each one a door to a story, a melody, a dream. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the cold smoothness beneath her touch. For a brief moment, the chatter of the auditorium faded, replaced by the soft echo of her own heartbeat. She could hear herself breathing, slow and steady, trying to calm the nervousness that threatened to overtake her. She glanced around. Some of her classmates were openly mocking her, pointing, whispering, and even laughing. She could feel their judgment pressing down on her, but she also felt something else, a spark deep inside that refused to be dimmed. She had practiced this moment for months in the quiet of her room, imagining herself on this very stage, imagining the music flowing from her fingers. And now, standing here, she realized that no amount of ridicule could stop her from trying. Taking a deep breath, she settled onto the piano bench. It felt a little stiff beneath her, but she adjusted until she was comfortable. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, almost hesitating at first, afraid that the first note might shatter the fragile courage she had gathered. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her. The students' laughter faded into silence as they realized she was about to play. Some leaned forward, curiosity replacing their mockery, though a few still exchanged doubtful glances. The first note she pressed was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it carried a strange clarity that made the room pause. It was not perfect, and it didn't need to be. She let her fingers find their way, moving slowly, letting the sound guide her. Each key she pressed became more confident, more intentional. The melody began to take shape, gentle at first, like the quiet stirring of leaves in a breeze. Her body relaxed with every note, and for the first time she forgot about the stares, the whispers, and the laughter. Music had taken over, and she was no longer just a girl on a stage. She was the storyteller, the painter, the creator. Some students were shifting in their seats, surprised by the delicate sound that filled the auditorium. The mocking whispers were replaced with murmurs of curiosity. A few leaned closer to see if the small, quiet girl could actually produce something beautiful. Even the teachers, who had been observing from the sidelines, felt a spark of interest. It was not common to see a student approach the piano with such quiet determination. Her fingers moved more freely now, discovering patterns and rhythms she had only imagined in her room. Each note seemed to connect to the next effortlessly, like a chain of moments falling into place. She could feel the emotion in the music, a blend of nervousness, hope, and unspoken dreams. The piano no longer felt like a piece of furniture. It was alive, responding to her touch, carrying her story through the room. Suddenly, a small group of students near the front started to whisper, "Wait, she's really good." Another nodded, unable to hide the surprise on their face. Their laughter from moments ago had completely vanished, replaced with genuine curiosity. The girl, still focused on the keys, remained unaware of this change in perception. She was lost in the music, letting it flow through her fingers, through her heart, filling the auditorium with a sound that was both fragile and strong. As the melody continued, her confidence grew. Her earlier hesitation melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose. Each note she played was deliberate yet free, carrying the essence of months of practice, patience, and quiet determination. The students who had mocked her could now see the transformation. The girl they had laughed at was not the same person. She was someone brave enough to face judgment, someone capable of creating something that could touch hearts. A few students exchanged glances, realizing that they had misjudged her entirely. They had assumed that a quiet, unassuming girl could never command attention, could never evoke emotion. But the music told a different story. The notes were soft, but they were full of life, telling a story of perseverance, courage, and hidden talent. The auditorium, once filled with laughter, now hummed with a silent admiration. She continued to play, her hands dancing over the keys with increasing assurance. The melody had grown richer, deeper, resonating in the hearts of everyone who listened. Even those who had not paid attention before were now captivated, drawn in by the beauty of the music and the courage of the girl who dared to play. The laughter was gone, replaced by a profound stillness that demanded respect. In that moment, she realized something important. It was not about winning applause or proving people wrong. It was about expressing herself, letting the music speak when words could not. The piano was not a stage for competition, but a bridge between her inner world and the outside. She felt a sense of freedom she had never known, a release from the fear that had held her back for so long. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then slowly a few claps began, hesitant at first, then louder as more people joined in. Some students smiled, eyes wide with surprise, realizing that their mockery had been misplaced. The teachers nodded approvingly, recognizing the quiet determination and talent that had brought this moment to life. She stood up from the bench, feeling a mix of relief and pride. Her heart was still racing, but it was a happy, exhilarated kind of racing. She had faced judgment, doubt, and ridicule, and yet she had created something beautiful. For the first time, she truly understood the power of persistence, courage, and believing in oneself. As she walked off the stage, a few students approached her, still in awe. They offered compliments, smiles, and words of encouragement. It was not just about the music. It was about the courage to step forward despite fear. The girl had shown them that talent could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes quiet determination could speak louder than the loudest laughter. In the end, the auditorium returned to its usual bustle, but something had changed. The memory of the girl at the piano, her fingers moving with grace and emotion, lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. It was a reminder that true courage was often quiet. That talent could surprise even the harshest critics, and that music, in its purest form, could bridge the gap between doubt and admiration. After the first notes had sounded, the girl felt a strange mixture of relief and nervous energy. Her fingers had warmed to the keys, each one now familiar and welcoming beneath her touch. The initial fear, the trembling hesitation, had started to fade, replaced by a quiet focus. She was aware of the audience, but it was no longer their judgment that mattered. It was the music and the story she wanted it to tell. She let her hands move softly, carefully, finding the rhythm that felt natural to her. The auditorium, which had been filled with laughter just moments ago, now held a tense curiosity. Some students leaned forward, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the sound that had emerged from someone they had dismissed. The melody was not complicated, not showy or flashy, but it was sincere and clear, like a message being gently delivered from one heart to another. Teachers in the back watched closely, recognizing that this was more than a simple school performance. It was a moment of quiet courage. Her first notes had been soft, almost like a whisper, but as her confidence grew, so did the music. The girl began to explore more of the keyboard, moving from simple, slow notes into flowing sequences that carried a sense of movement and life. Each note connected naturally to the next, forming a melody that was tender yet expressive. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide her. Her mind was no longer filled with the whispers and snickers. It was filled with patterns, emotions, and rhythm. She was no longer playing for the audience. She was playing for herself, and in doing so, she found her voice. Some students who had been mocking her earlier were now leaning forward in surprise. One whispered, "She's actually good." Another nodded, still staring at her fingers as they danced over the keys. Their expressions had changed from ridicule to disbelief, and finally, to curiosity. They could not deny what they were hearing. This girl, who had seemed fragile and timid, had a quiet strength that was beginning to shine through in her music. She moved her hands with increasing confidence, experimenting with small variations in the melody. Some notes were softer, almost disappearing into the quiet hum of the auditorium, while others were stronger, echoing off the walls and filling the space. Her movements became more fluid, natural, and expressive. It was as though the piano itself had become an extension of her body, translating her emotions into sound. The music was no longer just notes on a scale. It was a story, a living thing that reached out to everyone listening. The girl felt a sense of liberation she had never known before. Every time she played a note, she released a fragment of her anxiety, her self-doubt, and her fear of judgment. In return, she received something she had longed for silently: a connection. The audience, even those who had mocked her at first, were listening. They were paying attention not because they were forced to, but because they were drawn in by the honesty of her music. It was not loud or grand, but it was real, and that authenticity held more power than any performance built on skill alone. Her fingers traveled across the keys in a gentle rhythm, weaving together patterns that felt both deliberate and spontaneous. She was exploring, discovering the limits of her own skill and the expressive power of the instrument. Each chord she struck seemed to tell a small part of a larger story. She could feel the emotional weight of the notes as she played, sensing the rise and fall, the tension and release, and the delicate balance that made music resonate with people. For her, the piano had always been a friend, but now it was also a teacher, guiding her through the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. A few students in the front row exchanged astonished glances. One whispered to another, "I never thought she could do that." The other nodded, unable to find words, caught in the spell of the music. Their previous mockery had faded completely, replaced with admiration and perhaps a touch of regret for underestimating her. Even some teachers moved slightly in their seats, their expressions softening as they absorbed the sincerity of the performance. The girl did not stop or hesitate. Each movement of her fingers carried intention and emotion. She allowed herself to experiment, to let the music flow naturally rather than forcing it. Sometimes she would linger on a note, letting it resonate, then move swiftly to the next, creating a contrast that was subtle but powerful. The sound filled the room in waves, touching each listener in a personal way. Those who had doubted her could not ignore the beauty of what they were witnessing. It was not just her skill that impressed them. It was her courage, her willingness to be vulnerable, and her ability to communicate without words. As she continued, her confidence grew further, and her playing became more expressive. She was beginning to understand the power of dynamics. The soft moments drew listeners in, and the stronger notes held them in awe. She played with intention, feeling every vibration, every echo, every pause. The music seemed to breathe along with her, expanding and contracting, telling a story that words could never capture. It was intimate and universal at the same time, and the audience felt it. They were no longer separate from her. They were participants in the story she was unfolding with her hands. The girl's heart raced with excitement and nervousness, but it was a good kind of tension, one that pushed her to explore even further. She remembered the long hours she had spent practicing alone, imagining this very moment, and now she realized that all those efforts were not wasted. The timid, quiet girl who had walked onto the stage moments ago had transformed into someone who could hold a room with her music. It was a revelation, both to herself and to those watching. She was discovering that bravery was not about loud declarations or fearless actions. It was about showing up, trying, and expressing oneself despite fear. Some students who had been whispering began to whisper compliments. "She's amazing," one said softly. Another nodded, eyes wide, clearly moved by what they were hearing. Even the teachers were impressed, recognizing the subtle genius of her performance. It was not about technique alone. It was about feeling, expression, and the courage to let others witness her talent. Every note was a testament to her dedication, her perseverance, and her willingness to face ridicule head-on. As the music flowed, the girl allowed herself to become lost in the moment. She was aware of the audience, but their judgment no longer mattered. She played with freedom, letting the melody carry her wherever it needed to go. The piano had become a bridge between her inner world and the outer one, a way to communicate emotions that were otherwise difficult to express. Every chord, every arpeggio, every pause was intentional and heartfelt. She felt herself growing stronger, more confident and more alive with each passing moment. The initial mockery that had weighed on her just minutes ago had been replaced with curiosity, admiration, and respect. She had not sought validation, but it was now apparent that her courage and talent had shifted the perception of those around her. Even the students who had been the loudest in their laughter could not ignore the skill, emotion, and bravery that had emerged through her performance. She had turned the moment from one of potential humiliation into one of quiet triumph. With each passing second, the girl's connection to the piano deepened. She was no longer just performing. She was sharing a piece of herself, a fragment of her story, and her audience was listening. The notes, once timid and uncertain, had grown strong and confident, just like her. She felt a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride that came not from applause but from knowing that she had faced her fear and allowed her true self to be seen. This was a lesson she would carry forward, a reminder that courage and expression often have the power to overcome doubt and mockery. As she continued to play, the music filled every corner of the auditorium. The initial tension, the snickers, and the whispers of disbelief had vanished. In their place was attention, wonder, and the beginning of admiration. She was creating a space where judgment could not reach her, where her talent and her emotions were enough to command respect. For the first time, she felt truly understood, not through words but through the language of music itself. By the end of the piece, her fingers were slightly tired, but her spirit was soaring. She lifted her hands from the keys, breathing deeply, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. The silence that followed was powerful, almost reverent, as if the room itself was acknowledging the courage and talent that had just been displayed. Slowly, the first sounds of applause began to ripple through the audience, growing louder as more and more students and teachers joined in. The girl's cheeks flushed with a mix of surprise, pride, and joy. She had faced doubt, fear, and mockery, and emerged with a voice that could not be ignored. As she stood and walked off the stage, a few students approached her, their eyes wide with genuine admiration. They spoke softly, offering compliments and words of encouragement. It was a moment of connection, one that transcended the earlier judgment and laughter. The girl realized that the music had not only expressed her emotions but had also shifted the perception of those around her. She had shown that courage, determination, and sincere expression could make even the most skeptical audience pause, listen, and appreciate. This experience would stay with her, a reminder that talent and bravery often reveal themselves in the quietest moments, and that those willing to face their fears can touch hearts in ways that words alone cannot. As she continued to play, something shifted inside her. The initial fear and tension that had held her back now seemed distant, almost like a memory from another life. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing ease, guided by the rhythm and emotion she felt within herself. The melody grew, richer, more expressive, weaving patterns that were both delicate and powerful. Each note carried meaning, a reflection of her patience, her dedication, and the countless hours she had spent practicing alone in the quiet of her room. The audience, who had started with skepticism, were now completely absorbed. Their earlier laughter had been replaced with a focused silence, broken only by the soft resonance of the piano filling the auditorium. The students who had mocked her before now leaned forward in their seats, unable to look away. They whispered to each other, astonished, as the music unfolded with unexpected depth and emotion. Some even found themselves holding their breath, caught in the spell of the performance. Her hands moved more confidently now, exploring the keyboard with a freedom that was both exhilarating and humbling. She shifted from soft, tentative notes to stronger, more deliberate chords. The contrast created a dynamic tension that held the audience in rapt attention. The music seemed to have a life of its own, guiding her through unexpected twists and turns, and she followed it instinctively, letting her heart lead the way. The girl's emotions flowed through her fingers as she played, translating every feeling into sound. There was a sense of longing, of hope, of quiet triumph over fear. The notes spoke of determination and courage, of the struggle to be seen and heard despite doubt and ridicule. The audience felt it too, sensing the depth behind the music. Teachers nodded in quiet admiration, recognizing the talent and emotion that were rarely seen in a student so young. Even the students who had laughed at her earlier were now captivated, realizing that they had underestimated her completely. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be fully immersed in the music. Every chord, every scale, every pause was intentional and heartfelt. She played not for approval, not for applause, but because she could not do otherwise. The piano had become an extension of herself, a vessel for her emotions, and she surrendered to it completely. The auditorium seemed to disappear around her, leaving only the sound of the keys and the story they told. The melody grew more complex, yet never forced or artificial. She experimented with subtle variations, shifting the rhythm, changing the tempo slightly, exploring the full range of the instrument. The notes carried a sense of motion, rising and falling like waves, ebbing and flowing with emotion. The audience was drawn in, feeling each rise and fall, each tension and release. It was as if the music was speaking directly to them, bypassing words and reaching straight to the heart. A few students whispered, almost incredulously, "She's incredible." Others nodded, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise and admiration. Some even looked slightly ashamed for having doubted her. The girl's courage to continue despite earlier mockery had transformed the room. What had begun as ridicule had turned into awe. The lesson was clear. Talent and determination often revealed themselves in moments when people least expect it. Her hands danced across the keys, moving from soft, tender passages to powerful, resonant chords. The contrast created a sense of storytelling, a journey unfolding through music. She could feel the emotions building within her and let them flow freely, trusting the instrument to carry her thoughts and feelings. Each note seemed to resonate not only in the room but within herself, reinforcing her sense of accomplishment and self-worth. The students who had been the most vocal in their mockery were now silent, captivated by the unexpected brilliance of her playing. They watched wide-eyed as she poured herself into the music. It was no longer just a performance. It was a revelation. Her courage, her skill, and her emotional honesty had transformed the perception of everyone present. The quiet girl, who had once seemed fragile and unassuming, was now a force commanding attention and respect. She began to play faster, her fingers moving with a fluidity that surprised even her. The melody became more intricate, yet never lost its emotional core. She experimented with harmonies and rhythms, exploring the depths of the piano and her own creativity. The audience could sense the growing confidence and mastery in her performance, and they were mesmerized. The music was no longer just sound. It was a conversation between her and everyone listening. Her heart pounded with excitement and a touch of nervousness, but it was no longer fear. It was joy, exhilaration, and the thrill of discovery. She realized that every note, every pause, every variation was a part of her own story, and that story was being heard, felt, and appreciated. The piano had become a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of the audience, a medium through which she could communicate her deepest emotions. The auditorium was completely still, the previous chatter and whispers replaced by a focused attention that seemed to hang in the air. Every student, every teacher was listening intently, drawn into the story unfolding through the music. The girl felt a sense of connection, a silent understanding between herself and the audience. They were witnessing her courage, her talent, and her vulnerability, and it moved them in ways that words could not capture. She continued to play, her fingers moving with precision and grace. The melody shifted and evolved, telling a story of determination, resilience, and the beauty of expressing oneself despite fear and doubt. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them. The girl had transformed the space, turning it from a room of mockery into a sanctuary of emotion and understanding. As the piece approached its climax, her playing became more intense, yet controlled. The music rose and fell with dramatic effect, capturing the full range of her emotions. She felt a sense of liberation, knowing that she had faced her fears and allowed her true self to shine. The piano was no longer an obstacle or a source of anxiety. It was a partner, a friend, and a medium for her expression. She was in harmony with it, and together they created something that resonated deeply with everyone present. The students who had laughed at her initially were now silent, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Teachers nodded, clearly impressed by the depth and emotion of the performance. Even the most skeptical students could not deny the power and beauty of what they were witnessing. The girl had transformed from a timid, quiet student into a confident, expressive musician, and her audience could feel it. As the final notes echoed through the auditorium, there was a brief moment of complete silence, then slowly applause began to ripple through the room, growing louder as more people joined in. The girl lifted her hands from the keys, breathing deeply, her heart racing with a mixture of pride, relief, and joy. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and fear, and emerged with a voice that could not be ignored. She stood and walked off the stage, feeling a sense of accomplishment and self-worth that she had never known before. Students approached her, offering compliments and words of admiration. Teachers smiled, nodding in approval. The girl realized that she had not only shared her music, but had also demonstrated courage, determination, and the power of expressing oneself despite fear. The experience would stay with her, a lasting reminder that bravery and talent often reveal themselves in the most unexpected moments. In that auditorium, in front of students who had mocked her just minutes before, the girl had discovered something extraordinary. She had discovered her voice, her courage, and the ability to touch hearts through the beauty of music. The performance had changed her, and in some way, it had also changed everyone who had witnessed it. It was a moment of transformation, a reminder that talent and determination can shine brightest when least expected, and that true courage is often quiet, persistent, and unassuming. The girl could feel a strange, wonderful energy as she continued to play. Each note carried more confidence than the last, and with it, a sense of connection with everyone in the auditorium. The music was no longer just her expression. It was becoming something shared, something that united the audience in the story she was telling with her fingers. The laughter and whispers from before had vanished completely, replaced by an almost reverent silence. Even those who had been the harshest critics were leaning forward, unable to take their eyes off her. Her hands moved with ease, dancing over the keys, creating a melody that was both intricate and soulful. The rhythm shifted from gentle, flowing passages to more lively and passionate sections, giving the audience a sense of motion, of a journey being traveled without leaving their seats. Every note seemed to carry intention and emotion, telling a story that words could not convey. The girl had begun to realize that music was a language of its own, one that could speak directly to the heart. The students who had mocked her earlier now exchanged glances of disbelief. One whispered, almost in awe, "I didn't know she could play like that." Another nodded silently, unable to hide their surprise. The girl's performance was breaking down their preconceptions, challenging their assumptions, and creating an entirely new perception of her. They had seen her as timid and fragile, someone to mock, but now they were witnessing her courage, talent, and the depth of her emotion. As she continued, her playing grew even more expressive. She experimented with the tempo, slowing down certain passages to let them resonate and then speeding up in moments of excitement. The contrast created a dramatic effect that held the audience completely engaged. Teachers in the back smiled quietly, impressed by the emotional maturity and technique she displayed. The girl's focus was unwavering. She had become one with the piano, her mind and fingers working together seamlessly to produce a sound that was both beautiful and powerful. The music carried a sense of narrative, telling a story of growth, bravery, and self-discovery. The audience could sense the journey she had been on, from the nervous, hesitant girl who first approached the piano to the confident, expressive musician they now saw. Each chord, each arpeggio, each pause was a reflection of her inner world, and it touched the listeners deeply. Even the students who had previously been dismissive could not deny the skill, passion, and authenticity of her performance. She allowed herself to close her eyes, feeling the full range of her emotions and letting them guide her fingers. There was a certain freedom in surrendering to the music, a joy in knowing that she could communicate her thoughts and feelings without needing words. Every note was deliberate yet flowing, like a conversation that moved effortlessly from one topic to another. The girl felt a sense of liberation she had never experienced before. a realization that bravery and expression were intertwined. Some students began to whisper words of admiration. "She's amazing," one said softly. Another nodded, unable to find the right words, simply watching as the music filled the room. Even the teachers were impressed, recognizing the rare combination of talent, courage, and emotional depth. The girl's performance was more than a recital. It was a revelation, a reminder that even those who seem quiet and unassuming can possess incredible gifts. Her hands moved faster now, executing complex passages with precision and grace. The music rose and fell, creating tension and release that drew the audience in completely. Each section of the piece seemed to tell a different part of her story, from moments of uncertainty to triumph and self-assurance. She was no longer just playing notes. She was communicating, sharing a piece of herself with everyone who listened. The students who had been the most critical now sat in awe, their previous judgment replaced by a deep respect. Some even smiled shyly, realizing that they had misjudged her entirely. The girl's courage had transformed not just the room but the way they viewed her. She had taken a risk, faced ridicule, and turned it into a moment of inspiration and beauty. It was a lesson that would linger with them, a reminder that talent and bravery often emerge in unexpected ways. The melody shifted again, becoming softer, more reflective. The girl allowed herself to linger on each note, letting it resonate in the silence that followed. The audience was captivated, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music. Every pause, every subtle change in tone, every gentle emphasis was intentional, conveying emotions that could not be spoken. The room seemed to breathe with her, moving in rhythm with the story she told through the piano. Her confidence continued to grow with each passing moment. She had faced the initial fear, endured the mockery, and emerged stronger and more self-assured. The piano had become her voice, her medium for connection, and she embraced it fully. The audience responded instinctively, drawn into the world she had created with her music. Even those who had never considered her capable were now witnesses to her extraordinary talent. The girl's fingers moved with fluidity and precision, exploring every corner of the piano. She transitioned from gentle, lyrical passages to more dramatic, intense moments, creating a dynamic contrast that held the audience in rapt attention. Each note was infused with emotion, each chord carefully shaped to express her inner world. The music was alive, a living extension of her courage and creativity, and it resonated deeply with everyone in the room. The students who had once laughed found themselves leaning forward, their expressions a mix of astonishment and admiration. The teachers nodded approvingly, impressed by the skill, technique, and emotional depth displayed by a student they had underestimated. The girl's performance had transformed the atmosphere completely, replacing doubt and mockery with respect and awe. It was a powerful demonstration of the impact of courage, determination, and authenticity. As the piece reached its climax, the girl poured every ounce of emotion and energy into her playing. The music swelled, filling the auditorium with a powerful resonance that seemed to touch every listener. She felt a sense of triumph, not just for the applause she knew would come, but for the journey she had undertaken, the risk she had taken, and the courage she had shown. The piano had become a conduit for her self-expression, allowing her to communicate in a way that words could never capture. The audience was completely absorbed, holding their breath as the final notes reverberated through the room. For a moment, there was complete silence, a collective pause as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the auditorium, growing louder and more enthusiastic as more students and teachers joined in. The girl lifted her hands from the keys, breathing deeply, her heart racing with pride, relief, and joy. She stood and walked off the stage, feeling a mixture of emotions she had never experienced before. Her cheeks were flushed, her mind buzzing with the exhilaration of having faced fear and come through stronger. Students approached her, offering words of praise and admiration. Teachers smiled, nodding in approval. She realized that her performance had not only shared her music, but had also conveyed courage, resilience, and authenticity. In that auditorium, in front of students who had mocked her just moments before, the girl had demonstrated something extraordinary. She had discovered the power of facing fear, the strength of perseverance, and the beauty of expressing oneself without hesitation. Her music had transformed the room, shifting the perception of her peers and leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. It was a moment of revelation, a reminder that true talent and bravery often emerge in quiet, unassuming ways, and that those willing to take risks can touch hearts in ways they never imagined. When the final note lingered in the auditorium, there was a moment of silence that felt almost sacred. Everyone in the room, from students to teachers, held their breath, taking in what they had just experienced. The girl sat at the piano bench for a moment longer, feeling the vibration of the last chord through her fingers. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of having shared something deeply personal with the world. She had poured herself into the music, and now she could feel the impact it had made. Slowly, applause began, soft at first, then growing into a thunderous wave of appreciation that filled the entire auditorium. The sound was overwhelming in the best way possible. The girl's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride, relief, and joy. She had faced ridicule, judgment, and doubt, and now she was being celebrated for her courage, her talent, and her honesty. Every clap, every cheer, every smile from her peers and teachers reinforced the value of the risk she had taken, of the bravery it took to step onto that stage. Students who had been the loudest in their mockery approached her hesitantly, unsure of how to react. Their faces showed surprise, admiration, and even a hint of shame for having doubted her. They offered compliments, some in quiet whispers, others with shy smiles. "That was amazing," one said. Another nodded, unable to find the right words, but their eyes spoke volumes. The girl accepted their words with grace, recognizing that her performance had changed their perception, just as it had changed her own understanding of her potential. Teachers approached as well, their expressions filled with approval and pride. They congratulated her not just on her skill, but on her courage and dedication. One of them said quietly, "You've shown everyone here the power of persistence and bravery. Never lose that." Her heart swelled with gratitude. She realized that the music had done more than entertain. It had bridged gaps, healed insecurities, and created understanding between her and her audience. The piano had been her voice when words were insufficient, and it had spoken volumes. The girl stood from the piano bench, her hands still slightly trembling from the intensity of the performance. She walked toward the audience, and a few students reached out to shake her hand, to offer congratulations, to express admiration that they had never thought they would feel. She smiled, genuinely, feeling a warmth that was both unexpected and deeply rewarding. The auditorium, once filled with mockery and doubt, now resonated with respect and appreciation. It was a transformation she had orchestrated with her courage and her music. As she left the stage, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The nervousness, the fear of ridicule, the whispers and laughter of her peers, all of it had been a test of her resolve. She had faced her own doubts, embraced her vulnerability, and allowed herself to be seen. In doing so, she had discovered not only her talent but also her inner strength. It was a lesson that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. In the days that followed, the girl noticed a change in her school life. Students who had once ignored or mocked her now approached her with respect and curiosity. They asked her about her practice, her favorite pieces, and her experience performing on stage. Teachers encouraged her to participate in more performances, recognizing that her talent deserved to be shared with a wider audience. She continued to play the piano with the same dedication, but now there was a new layer of confidence and assurance in her approach. The girl also began to notice a change within herself. She felt a growing sense of self-worth and belief in her abilities. She understood that the fear she had felt before stepping onto the stage was natural, but that it could be transformed into energy, focus, and creativity. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a medium through which she could explore her emotions and communicate with others. Each practice session, each performance was an opportunity to grow, to express, and to connect. Her experience at the auditorium also left a lasting impression on her peers. Students who had witnessed her performance remembered the courage and skill she displayed. They realized that people often underestimate others based on appearances or assumptions, and that true talent and bravery are revealed in unexpected moments. Some students began to support and encourage each other more openly, inspired by the girl's example of resilience and authenticity. The ripple effect of her performance extended beyond the stage, influencing the culture of her school in subtle but meaningful ways. The girl's family, too, celebrated her achievement. They had watched her practice tirelessly at home, But seeing her perform in front of an audience was a proud and emotional moment. They recognized not just her musical talent, but her determination and bravery. They offered words of encouragement, reminding her that her journey was just beginning and that her potential was limitless. Their support reinforced her belief that pursuing her passion was worth every challenge and every moment of doubt. As weeks turned into months, the girl continued to perform, participating in school events, local competitions, and community gatherings. Each performance brought new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. She remained humble, focused on the music itself rather than accolades or recognition, but she carried with her the knowledge that her courage and dedication could inspire others. Her story became a quiet legend within her school, a reminder that bravery, talent, and perseverance often shine brightest when least expected. The girl also began to mentor other students who showed interest in music. She shared her experiences, encouraging them to face their fears and pursue their passions no matter how daunting it might seem. Her guidance was gentle but firm, emphasizing the importance of practice, patience, and self-belief. Many students found inspiration in her example, realizing that growth and achievement often come from consistent effort and the courage to step into the unknown. Looking back on that first performance, the girl understood how transformative it had been. She had faced ridicule and doubt, yet she had turned it into a moment of beauty, connection, and empowerment. The piano had been her ally, her voice, and her tool for expressing emotions that words could never capture. The experience had taught her that true courage comes from within, and that expressing oneself authentically can have a profound impact on others. The story of the girl and her piano continued to inspire those around her. Students who had once doubted her remembered the sound of her music, the grace of her performance, and the quiet strength she had displayed. Teachers recalled the courage and skill she demonstrated, recognizing the power of nurturing talent and encouraging students to embrace their passions. The girl herself carried the memory as a reminder that fear is temporary, but courage, perseverance, and authenticity endure. In the end, the girl's journey was not just about music. It was about growth, self-discovery, and the power of expression. She had transformed a moment of potential humiliation into a triumph of spirit and talent. She had inspired her peers, earned the respect of her teachers, and discovered the strength within herself. The piano, once a source of nervous anticipation, had become a symbol of her courage, creativity, and resilience. Through it, she had learned that the most profound victories often come from facing one's fears and embracing the courage to be seen and heard.